What if I told you that the moment you swallow your first dose of creatine, your body doesn't wait? It doesn't pause, it doesn't ease in gently, and it certainly doesn't sit idle while you go about your morning. Within minutes, a cascade of biochemical events begins unfolding inside your cells quietly, invisibly, and with remarkable precision. And the wildest part? Most people who take creatine every day have absolutely no idea what's actually happening inside them. This isn't a story about gym culture or protein shakes or the latest fitness trend. This is a story about one of the most studied, most validated, and most misunderstood molecules in all of human biology. A molecule your body already produces. A molecule that sits at the intersection of physical power, mental sharpness, and long-term cellular health. And today we're going to walk through every single stage of what happens hour by hour, week by week, system by system when you take creatine every single day. By the time you reach the end of this, you won't just know that creatine works. You'll know exactly why it works, how it works, and why the science keeps piling up in its favor decade after decade. And trust me, what happens in the first 24 hours alone will completely change how you think about this supplement. Let's start at the very beginning. The moment creatine enters your digestive system, absorption begins in the small intestine. From there, it travels through your bloodstream and begins reaching its primary destination, your skeletal muscle tissue. Now here is something that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. Your muscles don't receive creatine passively. They actively pull it in, almost as if they've been waiting for it. There are specific transporter proteins embedded in your muscle cell membranes called creatine transporters, and these proteins essentially act as selective doorways. When creatine is available, they work to draw it inside the cell and store it. This uptake process is not random and it is not uniform. Muscles that are used more frequently and more intensely tend to hold the most creatine. But here's what no one tells you at the beginning. Even before you feel any difference, before you notice any change in the mirror, before your workout feels different, your cells are already preparing. The infrastructure for better energy production is quietly being built, layer by layer, the very first time you supplement. And this preparation isn't limited to athletes. It isn't reserved for bodybuilders or sprinters or elite performers. Every single person, the office worker, the retiree, the student pulling long nights, every person who takes creatine begins experiencing the cellular recalibration on day one. Because creatine isn't a foreign chemical invader. It's a molecule your body already recognizes, already uses, and already values. You're not introducing something alien. You're simply raising the level of something your biology has always depended on. Now, within those first 24 hours, something else begins happening that is almost always misread and mischaracterized. Your muscles start to shift their internal water balance. And the moment most people hear water and creatine in the same sentence, they assume bloating. They imagine puffiness, softness, the kind of water retention that makes you look unwell. But that interpretation is completely wrong, and it matters that you understand why. The hydration that creatine initiates is intracellular. That word intracellular is the key. The water isn't pooling beneath your skin or sitting in the spaces between your organs. It's moving inside the muscle cells themselves, drawn in alongside creatine through those same transporter proteins. And intracellular hydration is not a cosmetic event. It is a biological preparation. When muscle cells are optimally hydrated from the inside, they become more biochemically active. Their ability to maintain chemical balance during exertion improves. Their capacity for protein synthesis, the process that actually builds and repairs muscle tissue, becomes more responsive. The hydration that creatine creates is, at its core, a signal that the cell is getting ready to operate at a higher level. Think of it this way. When you properly oil the moving parts of a machine, you're not changing what the machine does. You're optimizing how well it does it. Intracellular hydration is creatine's way of oiling the machinery inside every muscle fiber it reaches. The changes are invisible on day one. But the foundation being laid in those first hours is what makes everything that comes later possible. Now let's talk about mitochondria, because this is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. Inside each of your muscle cells, mitochondria act as the primary energy-generating units. These are not passive structures. They are constantly active, constantly sensing the energy demands of your body, and constantly adjusting their output to match. Scientists often call them the powerhouses of the cell, which is accurate enough but undersells how dynamic and responsive they actually are. When creatine levels inside your cells begin to rise, mitochondria start interacting differently with the energy landscape around them. They become more responsive to sudden demands. Their ability to ramp up energy output quickly to go from standby to full activation in a fraction of a second improves measurably. This is not the stimulant rush of caffeine where you feel a sharp spike and then an equally sharp crash. This is something quieter and more durable. Your cells are becoming more capable in the background, not louder better. The analogy that captures it most accurately is this. Imagine you have a car with a perfectly functional engine, but the fuel delivery system has always been slightly slow to respond. You step on the accelerator, and there's a tiny lag before the power comes. Creatine essentially reduces that lag. The engine was always capable. Now the response time catches up to the capability. Studies show that this early phase of creatine loading leads to improved energy buffering, meaning your cells handle the peaks and valleys of exertion more efficiently. You don't fall off a cliff energetically the way you would without it. You can sustain more effort, recover between bursts faster, and hold intensity longer. And again, this doesn't only apply to people in a gym. Carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs, chasing after a young child, staying mentally alert through a 6-hour work session. All of these demand cellular energy. Creatine strengthens the very foundation that all of that runs on. But to truly understand creatine, you have to understand what it does for ATP, because ATP is the real story here. Adenosine triphosphate ATP is the universal currency of biological energy. Every single thing your body does, from blinking to thinking to sprinting to healing a wound, requires ATP. And here's the fundamental problem that ATP comes with. It burns through itself almost instantly. During maximum effort, a heavy lift, a sprint, a sudden explosive movement, your muscles can exhaust their available ATP within just a few seconds. That's not a flaw in your biology. That's simply how the system is built. Your body was never meant to store massive reserves of ATP lying around. It was designed to make it rapidly and on demand. So the question becomes, how fast can your body regenerate ATP once it gets used up? This is exactly where creatine changes everything. Inside your muscles, creatine is stored in a phosphorylated form called phosphocreatine. And phosphocreatine acts as an immediate, on-demand ATP donor. The moment your muscles start burning through ATP, phosphocreatine steps in and donates a phosphate group that allows ATP to reform almost instantly. This process, called the phosphocreatine system, or the ATP-PCR system, is the fastest energy pathway your body has. It doesn't require oxygen. It doesn't require complex metabolic steps. It's essentially an emergency energy reserve that fires the moment your cells need more power than they are currently generating. Without creatine, this system runs low quickly. You hit a set of squats, and by the 5th rep, your muscles are already scrambling for energy from slower pathways that produce fatigue byproducts faster and slow you down sooner. With elevated creatine stores, that emergency reserve is deeper. You can push through that 5th rep and the 6th and the 7th before the slowdown hits. The ceiling on your explosive capacity rises. But here is the detail that most people completely miss. ATP is not just a physical performance molecule. Your brain runs on it. Your heart depends on it. Every organ, every neuron, every immune cell in your body requires a continuous supply of ATP to function. When creatine improves the rate at which your cells regenerate ATP, the benefits don't stay contained to your biceps. They ripple outward across every system that relies on that energy currency, and that means every system in your body. Well, come back to the brain in a moment, because what creatine does for cognitive function is genuinely one of the most underappreciated stories in all of nutrition science. But first, muscle transformation. Because this is what most people come to creatine for, and the reality of how it works is far more interesting than the simplified version you usually hear. When people imagine creatine's effect on muscles, the mental image tends to be immediate and dramatic, like watching a balloon inflate. And that image sets people up for disappointment, because that's not what happens. The actual transformation is gradual, layered, and rooted in biology that operates on a weeks-long timeline. Understanding that timeline is what separates people who quit creatine too early from people who stick with it long enough to experience what it actually delivers. Here is what genuinely happens. In the first week or two, as creatine stores are filling up, you may notice that your muscles look slightly fuller. This is the intracellular hydration effect. Because water is being drawn into the muscle cells, the fibers themselves expand slightly. This is not fat. This is not bloat. This is hydrated, more biochemically active muscle tissue. Many people notice this and either misinterpret it as fat gain or feel prematurely excited, thinking dramatic size changes are just around the corner. Neither reaction is quite right. The fullness is real, but what matters more is what it enables. Better hydrated muscle fibers activate anabolic signaling pathways more effectively. Anabolic pathways are the biological routes through which your body builds and strengthens muscle. When creatine keeps those fibers well hydrated and well fueled, the signals your body receives during training, the damage signals, the tension signals, the metabolic stress signals are processed more efficiently. Protein synthesis rates increase. Recovery between sessions shortens. The adaptive response your body has to training becomes more powerful. What this means in practice is that the training you were already doing produces more results per session. You haven't changed your workout. You haven't added more volume or intensity. But your body is getting more out of every rep because the cellular environment in which those reps are happening has been optimized. And then, around the third week, something noticeable begins to happen at the neuromuscular level. Before the mirror changes, before your clothes fit differently, before anyone else notices anything, your nervous system starts performing differently. The connections between your brain and your muscles, the signals that coordinate muscle fiber recruitment, begin operating more precisely. You start recruiting more fibers during a heavy lift. Your peak force output increases. The relationship between effort and result shifts in your favor. This is why athletes almost universally report feeling stronger within 2 to 3 weeks of consistent creatine use, even when their body weight and muscle size haven't changed significantly yet. Strength always comes before shape. Creatine accelerates the strength phase, which then accelerates the shape phase. Understanding that sequence eliminates the frustration that causes most people to abandon supplementation before the real results arrive. By weeks 5 and 6, with muscles better fueled, better hydrated, and better signaled, and with training intensity having naturally increased because your capacity has grown, visible muscular development begins to emerge. The changes aren't always dramatic at this stage, but they are real, they are measurable, and they are built on a foundation that keeps compounding month after month. Now, let's talk about your brain, because this is where creatine goes from being a fitness supplement to being something altogether more significant. Your brain accounts for roughly 2% of your body weight, and yet it consumes somewhere around 20% of your total energy. It is, by any measure, the most energy-hungry organ you have per unit of mass. And the primary currency it runs on is, you already know the answer, ATP. Neurons communicate by firing electrical signals. Generating those signals, maintaining the ionic gradients that make them possible, and recovering quickly enough to fire again all require constant, uninterrupted ATP supply. When that supply dips, the consequences show up fast. Slower thinking, reduced working memory, mental fatigue, brain fog. The sensation of being cognitively depleted even when you haven't done anything physically strenuous. What researchers began to discover, and what has now been confirmed across multiple independent studies, is that creatine supplementation raises creatine levels in the brain, not just in muscles. And when brain creatine rises, neurons gain faster access to energy. They recover more quickly between firing events. They can sustain demanding cognitive work for longer before performance starts to decline. The effects on cognition are real, and they are measurable. Studies have shown improvements in working memory, the kind of memory that lets you hold information in your mind while simultaneously using it. Studies have shown faster reaction times, improved performance on intelligence tests that require fluid reasoning, better resistance to the cognitive degradation that comes with sleep deprivation. That last one deserves a closer look, because it has implications for almost everyone. When you are sleep deprived, your brain's energy reserves are compromised. The normal overnight restoration process is incomplete. You wake up cognitively slower, more prone to errors, less able to sustain focus. Creatine, by improving the brain's ability to regenerate ATP, acts as a partial buffer against this. It doesn't replace sleep, nothing does, but it genuinely attenuates the cognitive cost of not getting enough. Multiple studies have examined this specifically, testing cognitive performance under sleep restriction in subjects with and without creatine supplementation. The creatine groups consistently outperform the non-creatine groups on measures of speed, accuracy, and working memory. Now, here is something that very few people talk about when the topic of creatine comes up. Vegetarians and vegans experience significantly stronger cognitive benefits from creatine supplementation than omnivores do. The reason is straightforward but illuminating. Dietary creatine comes almost entirely from animal products, meat and fish primarily. People who don't eat those foods have lower baseline creatine levels in both their muscles and their brains. When they supplement, they are not just adding to an existing store. They are filling a genuine deficit. The neurological response is proportionally larger. Brain creatine levels rise more dramatically. The cognitive improvements are more pronounced. This tells us something important. It tells us that creatine's brain benefits aren't a bonus feature. They are a fundamental reflection of how dependent your brain is on adequate creatine availability to function at its best. And many people walking around today, vegetarians, vegans, and even omnivores who eat modest amounts of meat, may be operating at a neurological level below what they'd experience with optimal creatine stores. Think about what that means for a moment. The mental sharpness you feel when you're at your best? The speed of your thinking when you've slept well and eaten well and your brain feels clear? Creatine may be quietly raising that ceiling day after day in ways you've never attributed to it. Let's move to what happens during your actual training sessions once creatine stores are fully saturated, because the metabolic picture here is more sophisticated than most people realize. When you begin a high-intensity effort, a heavy compound lift, a sprint interval, a set of box jumps, your body immediately turns to phosphocreatine as its first line of energy. This is the fastest system available. But as the effort continues and phosphocreatine begins to deplete, your body transitions to glycolysis, where glucose is broken down to produce ATP. Glycolysis is powerful, but it produces byproducts. Hydrogen ions accumulate. The pH inside the muscle fiber drops. This is the chemical reality behind the burning sensation you feel during hard exercise. It's your muscles becoming increasingly acidic, and that acidity is a major driver of fatigue. Here is where creatine provides a secondary benefit that most people have never heard about. By supplying energy more efficiently through the phosphocreatine pathway during the early and middle phases of effort, creatine actually delays the point at which your body has to lean heavily on glycolysis. You don't eliminate acidity, your muscles still work through the same chemistry, but the rate at which acidity builds up is slower. You have more time before that burning sensation becomes limiting. You can complete more reps, hold more intensity, maintain higher power output for longer before you hit the wall. And there is a third energy benefit on top of that one. Glycogen, the form in which carbohydrates are stored in your muscles, is another critical fuel source during sustained, intense exercise. The problem is that glycogen is finite, and once you burn through it, performance drops sharply. Because creatine supplies energy so efficiently during explosive efforts, your muscles rely less on glycogen during those peak intensity moments. They preserve it. The glycogen you would have burned in the first 3 sets is still available for the 6th and 7th. Your endurance within a session extends. The quality of the later sets, when normally you'd be running on fumes, stays higher. This combination of faster ATP regeneration, delayed acid buildup, and better glycogen preservation means that every training session you do with elevated creatine is simply more productive than the same session without it. You generate stronger training signals. Your body receives a bigger adaptation stimulus. The compounding effect over weeks and months is substantial. Recovery is the next chapter in this story, and it's one that gets far less attention than performance, despite being equally important. When you finish a hard training session, your muscles don't recover passively. Recovery is an active, energy-demanding process. Damaged proteins need to be cleared and rebuilt. Cell membranes that were stressed during exercise need to be restored. Inflammatory signals need to be managed and resolved. Nutrient transport to recovering fibers needs to be maintained. All of this requires ATP, significant amounts of it, sustained over the hours and days following training. This is why people who are generally fatigued, underfed, or sleep-deprived recover more slowly. Their cells don't have enough energy to run the recovery process at full speed. And this is exactly why creatine improves recovery, not as a marketing claim, but as a direct consequence of its primary mechanism. When your cells can regenerate ATP faster, they can run the recovery process faster. Protein synthesis accelerates. Inflammation resolves more efficiently. The next training session arrives before the damage from the last one has fully anchored itself as lasting soreness. There's also the buffering effect on metabolic byproducts. During hard exercise, your muscles accumulate hydrogen ions, ammonia, and other metabolic waste products. These compounds contribute to the post-exercise discomfort that lingers for 24 to 48 hours. Creatine helps buffer and clear these substances more efficiently, not eliminating soreness entirely, but smoothing the recovery curve in ways that allow you to train again sooner and at higher quality. And the intracellular hydration that creatine maintains plays a role in recovery as well. Well-hydrated muscle cells have better nutrient transport. The amino acids, glucose, and micronutrients that your muscles need to repair and rebuild move more efficiently into and out of properly hydrated cells. It's the same principle as the machine analogy from earlier. Better internal conditions mean all the processes running inside those conditions become more efficient. Now we need to address the broader picture, what creatine does beyond the gym, beyond sport, beyond the pursuit of physical performance. Because this is where the research has been expanding rapidly and where most people's understanding of creatine is years behind the science. Creatine has been studied extensively in older adult populations, and the findings are striking. As we age, muscle mass naturally declines, a process called sarcopenia that accelerates significantly after the age of 60. Sarcopenia isn't just a cosmetic concern. Muscle mass is directly tied to metabolic health, bone density, fall risk, independence, and longevity. Losing it is a serious health event that unfolds slowly and invisibly until its consequences become impossible to ignore. Creatine supplementation in older adults has been shown to help preserve muscle mass, improve functional strength, the kind you use to get up from a chair, climb stairs, carry things, and enhance the results of resistance training programs. When older adults combine creatine with regular exercise, they retain muscle better, recover faster, and maintain higher levels of physical independence than those who exercise without it. In a world where muscle loss is one of the defining health challenges of aging, creatine is one of the few interventions with genuine evidence behind it. Beyond muscle preservation, there is emerging and increasingly compelling evidence around creatine's potential role in neurological health. Brain diseases and conditions that involve energy dysregulation, Parkinson's, ALS, Huntington's disease, traumatic brain injury are areas where creatine has been studied as a potential supportive intervention. The logic is biologically sound. If these conditions impair cellular energy production and creatine improves cellular energy production, there is a rational case for investigating its effects. Research is still ongoing in many of these areas, but the initial findings have been interesting enough to sustain a growing body of scientific investigation. Creatine has also been examined in the context of depression and mood. The brain's energy status has real implications for neurotransmitter regulation, and several studies have shown that creatine supplementation, particularly in women and in populations who are treatment-resistant to conventional antidepressants, may enhance the effectiveness of standard treatments. The mechanism isn't fully mapped, but the pattern of results across multiple studies is consistent enough to take seriously. None of this means creatine is a cure. None of it positions creatine as a medical treatment for any of these conditions. What it means is that creatine's influence on cellular energy metabolism is broad enough that its effects show up across an extraordinary range of biological systems we haven't traditionally associated with a fitness supplement. Now let's clear away the myths. Because no supplement has accumulated more mythology, more fear-based misinformation, and more unfounded concern than creatine, and it's time to put that to rest definitively. Myth 1. Creatine damages your kidneys. This is perhaps the most persistent and most harmful myth about creatine. It originates from a misunderstanding of how creatine is metabolized. When creatine is broken down in your body, it produces a waste product called creatinine. Creatinine is filtered by the kidneys and excreted in urine. Doctors routinely measure blood creatinine levels as a marker of kidney function, because if the kidneys are struggling, creatinine accumulates in the blood. When people take creatine supplements, their creatinine levels rise, because more creatine is being processed and more creatinine is being produced. This is completely normal and expected, but here is where the confusion enters. A naive reading of elevated creatinine might look alarming to someone who doesn't understand the context. It looks like a kidney function marker going in the wrong direction. So the leap gets made: creatine must be hard on the kidneys. That leap is simply incorrect. Decades of research on healthy individuals have found no evidence of kidney damage from creatine at recommended doses. The creatinine elevation is a metabolic artifact, not a sign of pathology. People with pre-existing kidney disease should consult a physician before supplementing. That's reasonable caution. But for healthy adults, the kidney concern is not supported by the data. Myth 2. Creatine causes dehydration and muscle cramps. This one is particularly ironic given what we've covered today. Creatine draws water into muscle cells. It supports intracellular hydration. The mechanism is quite literally the opposite of dehydration. Multiple controlled studies have examined whether creatine users experience more cramping than non-users, and the results consistently show no increased risk, and in some cases suggest a reduced risk. The cramp concern appears to have originated from early anecdotal reports, possibly from athletes who were simultaneously underhydrating and supplementing with creatine, incorrectly attributing the cramp to the supplement rather than to insufficient fluid intake. Myth 3. Creatine causes rapid muscle gain without training. Creatine has no anabolic effect independent of training stimulus. It doesn't cause muscles to grow while you sit on the couch. What it does is make your training more productive, your recovery faster, and your cellular energy environment more capable, so that when you do train, you get more out of every session. The muscle that builds is still built by you. Creatine just raises the ceiling on what your effort produces. Myth 4. Creatine is a steroid or hormone. It is not. Creatine is an amino acid derivative. It has no hormonal activity. It doesn't interact with androgen receptors. It doesn't suppress your body's natural hormone production. Comparing creatine to anabolic steroids is like comparing a multivitamin to chemotherapy. They are fundamentally different categories of substance. Myth 5. You need to cycle creatine on and off. There is no scientific evidence supporting the need to cycle creatine. Your body regulates creatine saturation naturally. When stores are full, absorption slows. When you stop supplementing, levels gradually return to baseline over several weeks. There is no documented downregulation of your body's own creatine production pathways that would require you to cycle off. Long-term continuous use has been studied and found to be safe in healthy individuals. Which brings us to the final dimension of this story. What happens when creatine becomes a permanent, long-term fixture of your daily life? In the first days and weeks, the changes are largely invisible, cellular and biochemical, building infrastructure beneath the surface. In the first month, performance improvements emerge. Strength rises, capacity grows, recovery becomes more consistent. In the following months, the compounding effect of better training sessions, better recovery, and better cellular function accumulates into measurable changes in physique, performance metrics, and cognitive resilience. But the real story of long-term creatine use is what it does to your baseline. With sustained creatine supplementation, your muscles maintain a higher floor of energy availability. You don't experience the same troughs of fatigue between sessions. Your recovery doesn't just bounce back, it builds forward. Each training block starts from a slightly higher baseline than the one before it, because you're not spending as much time and energy just recovering from damage. You're spending more of your adaptive resources actually growing stronger. For your brain, the long-term picture is equally compelling. With sustained creatine in your system, your neurons operate in an environment of more consistent energy availability. The daily fluctuations that lead to afternoon brain fog, the cognitive dips that come with stress or poor sleep, the slow decline in processing speed that many people accept as an inevitable feature of getting older. All of these are influenced, at least in part, by the brain's energy economy, and creatine, day after day, keeps that economy more stable. Long-term creatine use is also associated with better outcomes in aging populations, as we discussed. People who maintain muscle mass into their later decades do so in part because they've created the conditions through exercise and nutrition that make muscle preservation possible. Creatine is one of the most powerful tools available for maintaining those conditions as the biological headwinds of aging grow stronger. And here is perhaps the most important thing to understand about creatine as a long-term habit. The benefits don't peak and plateau in the first few months and then stop. They continue to compound. The infrastructure you build in year 1 supports better adaptation in year 2. The baseline you establish in year 2 raises the ceiling in year 3. Creatine doesn't give you a shortcut. It gives you a foundation, and foundations only become more valuable the more you build on them. So when you look at the full picture, the cellular mechanics, the ATP biology, the muscle physiology, the neuroscience, the aging research, the myth-busting, the long-term compounding, what does it add up to? It adds up to one of the most robustly supported, most comprehensively studied, most widely applicable supplements in the history of nutritional science. Not because someone decided to market it aggressively, not because it delivers fast, dramatic before and after results, but because the mechanism is sound, the evidence is deep, and the benefits physical, cognitive, and long-term are real. Creatine works because your body was already built to use it. All you're doing is ensuring the supply meets the demand. And when those two things align, when your cells have the fuel they need, when your brain has the energy it requires, when your muscles have the resources to grow and recover and perform, something shifts. Not dramatically, not overnight, but consistently, reliably, and in ways that compound across a lifetime. That is what happens to your body when you take creatine every single day. And now that you know the full story, does it change how you think about it? Drop your answer below. Whether you've been taking it for years and just learned something new, or whether this is the first time you've genuinely understood what it does, and you're now considering starting, your perspective matters. Because when real people share real experiences, it helps others make smarter, more informed choices about their own health.